For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all of the horrors of the half-lived life.
The highest expression of ourselves is pure love. I don't care if you're Henry Kissinger or George Bush or David Rockefeller, at that level of yourself, you're pure love. Everyone is. When we heal ourselves, we heal the world. When we love ourselves, we love the world. Freedom is upon us. Time to grasp it.
CNN has learned the Pentagon had a secretive program to research UFOs like the one Fravor spotted.
After more than 70 years of denial and ridicule of the UFO phenomenon, American medias in December of 2017 brings forth a revelation that the Pentagon itself, during a period of several years, had been involved in UFO research. In Denmark, the Danish media seem to have had the same policy in regards to UFOs. But it was not always like this. In Denmark, there were actually a point in time where the mainstream media seemed more open in relation to the topic. But we have to go all the way back to the 50s. The 50s media coverage of UFOs culminates in one huge case which seriously generated mass awareness concerning UFOs. Two young men who were already outside taking photos of birds, the 8th of July 1959, got to see a flying saucer and already had a camera ready to snap 3 photos of the UFO. Afterwards, the two men made a phone call to the mainstream Danish newspaper called BT, or in English, BT. The newspaper now decides to run with the men's story and dedicated the entire front page of the paper to one of the photos, alongside a huge article inside the paper telling their story. The photos literally starts a media frenzy, and already the same day the story was repeated in a vast number of the total Danish newspapers available at that time. Acknowledgement of the UFO phenomenon came from different places in society. This is the first clear saucer photos ever taken in Denmark, even from the Chief of the Air Force stating that we now have to take the experience seriously. The witnesses were interviewed in multiple radio shows and even ended up in a live TV broadcast the same evening. The following night, journalist Bertel Thomsen receives a phone call from a guy who identifies himself as a friend of the witnesses, saying that they were now ready to admit their lie. The witnesses now states that it was all a hoax and that the UFOs on the photos were nothing more than 2 plastic plates glued together and hung from a cord in between 2 trees. The following day, journalist Bertel Thomsen writes a retraction and an apology on behalf of the witnesses. Journalist Bertel Thomsen, his paper and the witnesses are then portrayed as mere amateurs and liars. Since this alleged practical joke, the Danish media seem to be more reluctant to bring UFO sightings. As if the papers from that day did not nourish any more credibility to the UFO phenomenon. Back in 2009, journalist Bertel Thomsen published his book in Danish called BT Nyhedsjern. Bertel Thomsen was one of the people in charge of bringing the saucer over Copenhagen news breaking back in 1959. In his book, journalist Bertel Thomsen describes some of the big cases he has been involved in. This also includes the saucer over Copenhagen case from 1959. The way journalist Bertel Thomsen describes the case reveals several interesting details, but one sentence from the book seems to share new light on the whole happening. In his final words describing the case, Bertel Thomsen mentions that the Army Intelligence Service had interrogated the witnesses. This can also be confirmed in this article or interview from 1959, where one of the witnesses describes the situation. One question may appear in this regard. Why did the Army Intelligence Service involve themselves in this case at all? Option number 1. They seriously believed that the Russians were able to produce a flying saucer that could hover silently above Copenhagen without being observed on any radar system. Option number 2. They seriously believed that we were being visited by someone or something from somewhere. Nowhere in Battle Thompson's book do he mention anything about when or why the Army Intelligence Service chose to involve themselves. However, a possible reason will be ventilated later in this film production. The witnesses both attended the late TV news broadcast. Therefore, they had to be in the TV studio at least until 21 p.m. or 22 p.m. That means that the witnesses could not have returned home until about 22 p.m. or even 23 p.m. At some point during this following night, journalist Battle Thompson receives a phone call by a person identifying himself as an acquaintance of the witnesses. Battle Thompson describes this point in time only with the words, "later that same night." What can be verified is that the witnesses just about 6 a.m. the following morning changed their story publicly to the newspaper that brought their UFO photos. So, sometime during the following night, Battle Thompson receives a phone call, and suddenly the whole UFO case is turned upside down. This means that for whatever reason, the Danish Army Intelligence Service decided to interrogate the witnesses in either the very late evening hours or even during the night. This somehow seems to leave you with the impression that the Danish Army Intelligence Service assessed the UFO photos to be of vital importance. Just exactly how this case took a turn seems a bit hazy. In the first article put out by the headline paper, the witnesses states that they were not able to live with their lie. If that were indeed the case, why was it necessary for the intelligence service to interrogate the witnesses at all? And why didn't this interrogation change the public statement of the witnesses? If the witnesses were no longer able to live with their lie, why was it necessary that an acquaintance would have to push them into anything? And why was this person together with the witnesses taken into account that the witnesses had not had any sleep for more than 24 hours at this point in time? In an interview back in fall of 2016, Battle Thompson told me that the witnesses were dissolved in tears when he came to them shortly after someone had called him over. Why then do this article describe a completely different scenario, saying that an acquaintance heard them laughing out loud just before they changed their mind? In another article, one of the witnesses states that it all went so fast that they did not even have the time to reject the live TV broadcast. Despite that may have been the case, yet another article reveals that the witnesses were not in more a hurry than that they also managed to sign a statement of truth document, putting themselves in a bad situation should it later be revealed that they were in fact lying. This actually put the amount of statement of truth documents signed by the witnesses the first day up to 3, according to multiple articles. In an interview, journalist Battle Thompson revealed that the employees at the newspaper did not nourish any doubt about the witness accounts the first day. Before 1980, only broadcast shows that were deemed important for historical content were stored. Despite this strange case, and despite that the second biggest accident in 100-year Danish history happened the same day. The Danish National Broadcast TV have not stored any recording from that evening. Despite that, actually, a small part of one of the witnesses' radio interviews has survived and is available for viewing in this YouTube channel, in Danish only. In some of the more recent articles that discusses this alleged hoax case of 59, you sometimes find reference to the author and lecturer Preben Wilhelmsen's book from 2005. In this book, author Preben Wilhelmsen states his opinion that even the chances of the witnesses to be interested in birds were nothing more than but a joke. But what author Preben Wilhelmsen is forgetting is that there has never been any doubt about the fact that the witnesses were indeed avid amateur photographs of birds. This is in fact also confirmed by a son of one of the witnesses in an interview in the spring of 2017, but also confirmed by a sister of one of the witnesses in an interview back in fall of 2019. In journalist Bertel Thomsens own book from 2009, he describes the film roll brought in by the witnesses as being full of bird photos, except of 3 photos of a flying saucer. In the news-breaking article, it says that the witnesses turned over their UFO photos as part of an undeveloped film roll, which were developed under full control by a professional nature photographer named Tage Nielsen. The witnesses therefore had no chance of knowing if the cord they later said they used were in fact visible, and actually much more which will be discussed later in this film production. According to the professional nature photographer Tage Nielsen, the photos could not have been faked. Therefore, if there's anything in this 59 alleged hoax case that could need further looking into, it must be the 3 photos brought to the paper by the witnesses that summer morning. All of the 3 photos reproduced in the papers of the UFO has all been cropped and enlarged, so only the part of the photo with the UFO has been shown. Ritzau Scanpix is a media corporation that stores a lot of the photos from all time papers. Ritzau Scanpix has assured me that they do not have any of the photos from that day. They further told me that the witnesses were not professional photographers, so it were not their right to own the photos. This makes the photo technical work more difficult, but not impossible. Already the same day as the UFO photos gained national-wide attention, a very interesting article pops up in another evening newspaper. The reproduced photo from this article is a game changer, as it reveals how the building behind the old balloon hangar is situated. On this photo, 3 buildings are visible. All these buildings are still here. We are looking at the balloon hangar towards the crossing of 2 streets. If we apply a cut-through on the photo, we can determine where the foreground is in alignment with the background. On the right side of the photo, this cut-through is easy to do. These dots are then applied to a map where the houses are drawn onto. These dots are then connected. Just looking at the photos, it's fairly easy to get a very close estimate on how much of the building is visible. This measures to about 12.5 meters. If we know just how much of the building is visible, we can also estimate how big the hole in the middle is. Looking at another reproduced image of this photo, the building is measured to about 200 pixels. The hole in the middle is measured to about 145 pixels. If we calculate pixels to meters, 1 meter is about 16 pixels. The hole in the middle is therefore about 9 meters wide. Finally, you can then measure 9 meters from the back building and onto the street on a map and then place a dot. You then have where the background is aligned with the foreground. If you connect this point with the edge of the balloon hanger, you can pinpoint where the photo is taken. Now, you cannot do this within 1 centimeter's precision, or 10 centimeters for that matter. It is, however, possible to try out the point of view in a 3D software program. If the area is created after a map from Google, the height of the buildings can be found using Google Earth. Now to return to the point of view where the lines crossed. When inserted a 3D camera into this point and angle it towards the balloon hanger in a height of about 180 centimeters, then you can compare the perspective with the photo taken by the witnesses in '59. Here are the perspective from the 3D model. Now the photo is being faded in over. The tryout between the perspective estimated through the witness photo and the 3D model is apparently a perfect match. If we move the 3D perspective just 1 or 2 meters in different directions, it is clear to see that the perspective do not match up. This is strong evidence that this is in fact the place where the witnesses took their second photo. To determine the distance from the point of view to the alleged UFO model, several methods can be applied. To verify the placement of the model, actually several methods were used. Corresponding mathematics has already been used to cross-confirm the placement of the model. This complete mathematical calculation will not be shown in this film, as it may frighten off some people. This complete mathematical calculation part can be viewed in the Danish version of this YouTube film, available in this channel. Now, just to summarize the mathematical method used in this research, as some super weird coincidence, a high-resolution reproduction of the part of the witness's second photo can actually be downloaded from several different photo stocks websites. The downloaded description comes with the same explanation of the UFO case as the witnesses gave on the first news-breaking headline day. This new photo gives us the possibility to measure the size of the chimney in relation to the UFO model. The model has been estimated to a size of about 24 centimeters. The chimney of the balloon hanger is about 70 centimeters in width. But what must be taken into account is that the balloon hangar is turned about 25 degrees away from the point of view. Therefore, the chimney must be considered to be about 25% less in width. The calculated chimney is therefore 57 centimeters. With this information, you can determine that the model is about 39 meters away from the point of view, just little more than 1/3 of the distance to the balloon hangar. Now, this is fairly easy to try out in a 3D software application. If the model is situated 38 meters from the point of view, you get an apparently exact match. So, based on mathematics, the 3D model seems to prove the numbers. This fuels one of the main skeptical inquiries concerning the publicly known UFO hoax case of 1959. As mentioned before, the official explanation on how the witnesses carried out this practical joke was clearly described as the UFO model were suspended from within 2 trees and photographed from 3 different angles. The revelation from the calculated point of view and the placement of the model is now the main concern. Now in Denmark we have different services that makes it possible to compare present-day area maps with a huge composite air photo from 1954. If the point of view is plotted onto a map together with the model's position, the model must be situated out in the middle of an open field. The closest trees are placed about 132 meters apart. Air photos from 1947 reveals just how open the area around the balloon hangar were. The last photo I were able to find are from August 1957. The photos show the exact same. An open grass field surrounding the balloon hangar. Now, as one debunker has put out, is that there are a lot of unprecise measurements in the approach used to calculate the point of view, and hits in his article that just a few imprecise measurements can lead to controversial claims. But what this debunker forgets is that all 3 measurements have been tried out in a 3D model that has been designed after a modern, precise area map and revealed same results. What this debunker also forgets is that the model places itself in the middle of an open field, and testing have shown just how revealing it is to be just off by 1 meter. There are no way to be off by that amount when a modern day area map is used as basis of the 3D model. We could be off by 1 or 2 meters perhaps, but not 40 or even 50 meters. No way. There is another reason to conclude that this alleged UFO model must be placed in the middle of this open area. It has to do with the same photo. When we know how wide the alleged UFO model is, we can then estimate how wide the minimum range between 2 trees must be, because it is clear to see that no trees or branches are visible in this height. The minimum suspension estimated is about 8.3 meters. Now, we know that even this photo was enlarged. How big the original photo is unknown, although it must have been big enough for the professional nature photographer that developed the photos under full control to conclude that the photos could not have been faked. This is actually strangely enough supported by the military's Defense Council in this article, who also were not able to find anything that would clear up the mystery after investigating the photos. This may actually reinforce this new evidence, because as the map shows, all the trees in the area is placed in rows. Now, obviously, one could argue that there are no way to be certain that a space of 8.3 meters did not, in fact, exist in the area. But what we need to remember is that the model is more than 1/3 of the distance there is to the balloon hangar. This means that close trees should become visible, seen from that distance. What also can be ruled out is, as we can conclude that the space between the alleged two trees are too big for any of the aisle of trees to be used alone. To sum up, the only way to get the point of view and the amount of air surrounding the model is to suspend a cord through an open grass field. The trees in the area were completely cut down during the 70s, and you can hardly today see the buildings behind the balloon hangar because of new trees blocking the view. But the GPS coordinates of the point of view are. Even though several other explanations has mysteriously surfaced over the years to just how the witnesses carried out this alleged practical joke, this public explanation is repeated in the only 2 interviews ever given by the witnesses after the story was changed. This rules out any error of speech or even journalist not quoting the witnesses correct. So when we look at this case, history wants us to believe that 2 young men created an outrageous hoax and now finally were able to settle things straight. It is baffling why these witnesses would use this situation to tell a new lie, and it do raise suspicion to what is actually the truth in this case matter. Actually, this statement from the witnesses are suspicious of several reasons. As mentioned before, if it is indeed a model we see on the photos, this model must be situated in the middle of an open field where surrounding trees is not a possibility. But also the second half of the statement can be called into serious questioning. The alleged UFO model are clearly not surrounded by leaves or branches on the first 2 photos, but on the final photo, the alleged UFO model must be situated close to a tree or a bush. This already proves that the model must have been situated at least 2 different places. Using the same area map, it is possible to try out the point of view to see whether or not it is possible to snap the first 2 photos and not replacing the model at all. Buildings and chimney placement can be found by the help of old photos and old area maps. To take the first photo, it was necessary for me to move the point of view about 27 meters to southwest to snap a similar photo. The 3D model also shows that you have to move the model approximately 50 meters to southwest from photo number 1 to photo number 2. The 3D model also concludes that in order to take photo number 1, the alleged UFO model must also be situated in the same open area on a court spanning little more than 120 meters. The official explanation is that the UFO model were hanging from a regular cord suspended from in between two trees. But evidence shows that the alleged UFO model must be situated different places in order to take the 3 photos. The evidence therefore contradicts the official explanation in multiple ways. This article were published in 7 or 8 different Danish papers from the 10th to the 15th of July 1959. The one witness that took all the blame, considering the hoax story, is the only one which is interviewed in the article. In the article photo, the witness is supposedly situated right at the UFO hoax scene of crime. As mostly everything concerning this case, this is actually not a truthful statement. As mentioned before, a Danish newspaper brought a reproduction of the photo that shows just how the building in the background is situated in relation to the balloon hangar. In the crime scene photo, this relation placement is off in comparison with the witness photo number 2. Also, the roof of the building in the background is much more elevated in comparison to the balloon hangar, meaning that the point of view can't have been the same. You can look up the roof of this building and actually measure its layout using Google Earth. This way we can try out the point of view from the scene crime photo. According to the 3D model, you have to move the point of view about 23 meters southwest to be able to snap a matching relation placement of the building. It almost seems like someone deliberately moved the point of view from a place with no trees to a place with trees. The article and the crime scene photo may very well lead the reader to believe that the model was hung from the trees just behind the witness. From photos and measurements, it is easy to conclude that the UFO model must have been approximately the width of the head of the witness. This width should therefore fill up almost the entire half of the balloon hangar. But the alleged UFO model is not much more than a dot and would be approximately 80% of the width of the chimney. Even though it says in the article that we are at the scene of crime, evidence shows that we are about 20 meters from where photo number 2 was taken and about 62 meters from where the alleged UFO model must have been situated. Even the first photo taken by the witnesses must have been from a different point of view, which means that none of the first 2 photos taken by the witnesses could have been from the so-called scene of crime. Journalist Bertel Thomsen writes in his book that he receives the news-breaking phone call already before 4 a.m. that morning. The sky seems to be equally bright on all 3 photos taken by the witnesses. Sunrise happened at 4:38 that morning of July 8th, 1959. That means that the witnesses must have taken all 3 UFO photos before sunrise. In the period of the morning called civil twilight, the sky starts to become bright as it appears on the 3 UFO photos. But the civil twilight phase starts at most about 1 hour before sunrise. In an interview, the son of one of the witnesses states that he had never heard his father say anything about shooting these UFO photos during multiple nights. That means that the witnesses did not have more time than perhaps about 10 minutes to snap all 3 UFO photos. When taken into account that the UFO model must have been situated 3 different places, and at least 2 of the places is situated in the middle of an open area with a suspended cord of about 130 meters. Furthermore, the 3D model shows that the alleged UFO model must have been in height of about 5.5 meters. It all seems so baffling to how this alleged hoax is even possible. The alleged UFO model comes out a bit blurry on all 3 photos taken that morning. This being despite of that the official explanation is that the alleged UFO model were suspended from in between 2 trees. There are details in the photos that suggest that the background seems more in focus. Now, if the wind were causing the alleged UFO model to move, it did not seem to have the same effect on the leaves on the trees. The National Weather History data reveals that the wind during that night were measured to 1 on a scale from 0 to 12. So whatever force that seemed to move the alleged UFO model, it's highly unlikely to be the wind. The alleged UFO model are angled on 2 of the photos taken that morning. This actually seems to correlate to other UFO reports that first perhaps became known within the UFO field much later in history. There are articles from earlier in the 50s that have the similar description of flying saucers, which the witnesses could have been inspired by. Yet nowhere does it say anything about how actually the witnesses suspended the alleged UFO model and how they got it to angle so much in an open field with an incredible span using a regular cord that still were so thin that it's completely invisible on all 3 photos. I once interviewed the sister to one of the witnesses. She told me that the photographer that developed the photos enlarged the part of the photos around the UFO so much that the reproduced image was the size of a wall. Still, they never could find any signs of cord or anything. The most reasonable choice could have been a hook mounted in the middle of the model. And again, would this hook not have been visible? Just how the witnesses mounted the alleged UFO model onto a regular cord remains to be one of this alleged UFO hoax case many mysteries. Now, what may just be an extreme coincidence, the controversial figure Robert Scott Lazar mentions in his Joe Rogan interview that the alleged flying saucer he witnessed titled its body towards its destination.
The way the craft that we worked on flies is it doesn't fly like a conventional aircraft does, and it doesn't fly like a flying saucer would in a 1950s movie. It flies belly first. I mean, it may set down conventionally, but it always rotates. It does a roll maneuver, puts its belly towards the target, and then moves away at high speed.
So it'd be like a car flying with the wheels forward.
Right. I mean, it may land on the wheels, but at some point when it wants to leave,
flips
up, points the wheels where it wants to go, and takes off.
Interestingly enough, the witness first said that they saw the UFO in the direction of the old soya cake factory. Then the flying saucer moved east over the houses and mysteriously actually seems to be titling its belly towards east. Also, the last photo they snapped that morning, the witnesses first describes that the flying saucer were moving over them and they managed to snap the last photo of the UFO hovering above an old military shooting range. This means that the UFO moved towards south. This means that the witnesses' view of the saucer would have been from behind, so to say. The interesting part about this is that the profiled saucer would indicate that its belly is actually tilted towards south, towards flying direction. Again, an extreme coincidence, I'm sure. Now, this means that if it were in fact a real flying saucer, it seems to mimic the movements described by Lazar since 1989. Furthermore, in a presentation, alleged 1975 abductee Travis Walton recalling a hum sound emanating from the saucer he witnessed. In a radio interview, a witness from the 1959 case first states that there only seemed to be a low singing sound. Now, this may be coincidence, however, taken into the account that these characteristics seem so strikingly similar, it really seems to call this alleged hoax UFO case into further examination. Another weird discrepancy regarding this case is related to the alleged UFO model used. The only photo of this UFO model the public ever got to see is limited to this photo. This photo were published in the first article after the witnesses had changed their explanation. If you look closer at the photo, it is not possible to get a sense of the UFO profile, as the witnesses only were showing the bottom of the model. This may not be a coincidence. It would be another 19 years before the public got to see the alleged UFO model from a different perspective. In an article from 1978, the model is exhibited so that it is possible to measure the proportions of the model and compare them with the proportions of whatever is on the 1959 photos. The top part of the UFO model is less than half of the width than the center part of the model. But on the last UFO taken that day in 1959, the proportions of the UFO model is completely different. The top part of the UFO is much wider. The poor quality of the reproduced photos could perhaps cause this illusion. This third photo of the UFO from 1959 seems to be the most clear picture of the UFO taken that day. And even though the first photo could indicate a different profile, original papers from that time do reveal similar proportions. A lot of these reproduced newspaper photos has lost some quality over time. But if we examine the descriptions given to us by the journalists and the professional photographers that got to see the much more clear original photos, they actually describes a shape that is similar to the appearance in this third photo. This description seems to be supported in this 1959 cartoon drawing, where an artist makes fun of the whole event. For some reason, the artist portrays the UFO as a soup tureen and not as a mere two plates glued together. In 1947 Roswell, both direct and indirect witnesses testifies that the military forced UFO witness to be exhibited with faked evidence. If the Danish Army intelligence had indeed somehow forced the witnesses into changing their story, it may in fact not have been the first time in history that would have happened. If in fact the witnesses did photograph a flying saucer above Copenhagen that night, surely other people must have seen it too. Actually, another Danish paper mentions that other people had reported seeing a flying saucer that same night above the lakes in central Copenhagen around midnight. Another interesting part of this article is that these earlier witnesses states that this flying saucer hovered in the direction of the suburb called Brønshøj. In a radio interview, the witnesses describes first noticing the flying saucer in the direction of the old soya cake factory. If a line is drawn from where the witnesses were situated during this time frame and onto the soya cake factory, this line points directly towards the suburb of Brønshøj. The witnesses furthermore describes the flying saucer as becoming bigger and bigger, indicating that it originated from the direction of Brønshøj. Even though this article states that the witnesses to the flying saucer over central Copenhagen already saw the UFO around midnight, there could be a connection between the two witness accounts. There are other photos of flying saucers taken throughout the 50s, both in Denmark and other countries. However, it would have been on only very rare occasions that people would have a ready camera at hand in the 1950s. This could be one of the reasons why so relatively few photos of flying saucers have ever emerged. Perhaps there are other reasons that could be more politically motivated, and even reasons that have yet to be exposed. In this article, Sergeant Officer Roald Nørskov states that what the young witnesses witnessed that night had been reported hundreds of other times in other countries. He continues, in July we had 153 reported UFO cases all around Denmark. Even though the chief of the Danish Air Force seemed to hint different explanation the first day of this UFO case, there seems to be a common consensus not to excite the public and to a wide extent deny the possibility of something unexplainable. When taken into account that evidence proves that the witness surely did not hang a UFO model in between two trees, it may seem a little suspicious that an officer is noted saying that he had always knew that the witnesses would change their minds. In several articles it says that the Defense Research Council, with the 3 UFO photos taken over Copenhagen, had decided to begin a more in-depth investigation into the UFO phenomenon. That the witness suddenly changed their explanation regarding the photos put an immediate halt to that investigation. In this article it says that the Defense Research Council foremost would start when they later would obtain the photos. Despite that may have been the case, someone decided to send out the Army Intelligence Service to interrogate the witnesses sometime during the evening, night, the day before, and the photos never officially reached the Defense Research Council. Not only were the Defense Research Council investigation into UFO cancelled, but the Danish media's attitude in regards to the phenomenon seemed to take a drastic turn down due to this case. This 1959 saucer over Copenhagen alleged hoax case were, according to several witness accounts, a big reason why the Danish media started their exclusion of the UFO phenomenon. The debunkers seem to have a hard time, even if mentioned, that there were numerous of mysterious statements from the chief of the Danish Air Force that seem to say different things. One of the things that are mentioned several times is that there seemed to have been an internal dialogue going on between several of the NATO countries due to this alleged UFO hoax case. This article says that there has been an inquiry to other countries. The article continues stating that it has happened before that NATO airplanes have crossed the border without warning. In this article it says that on a question on whether or not the Danish Air Force were in contact with other NATO countries due to this UFO happening, the chief of the Air Force states, "I can't comment on that." The article continues, "This used to be the answer authority gives when they for some reason can't say yes but actually means it." And this article states that this case alone caused quite a stir inside the NATO intelligence apparatus. Since the release of the Danish version of this film, there has been several debunkers involved in raising doubts in regards to several aspects of the presented research. This criticism is primarily led by Ole Henningsen, board member of the oldest Danish UFO organization, SUFOI. In an online article that debunks the Danish version of this film, he finalized his argument by exhibiting a summary from an alleged report from an officer which name is not mentioned. This summary explains the entire interrogation scenario as being nothing but a mere relaxed conversation with the witnesses. This explanation seemed to be contradicted in this 1959 article, where one of the witnesses publicly states that he did not want to go through that again. There seems to be a variety of different explanations emanating from the Danish Defense Council those days. Some article states that the Defense Council had asked for the UFO photos for further examination. In one article it says that they got the photos, but could not find anything that could resolve the mystery. This article seems to hint that the Defense Council did not receive the photos at all. And this article states that the Defense Council were not interested in the photos because they did not believe any of it. Suddenly, a couple of months after the release of the Danish version of this film, a new explanation emerges on the UFO organization SUFOI's own webpage. This explanation is laid out as a summary of a 2.5-page report done by a colonel not named from the Danish Defense Council. This colonel mysteriously seemed to know my film already 60 years ago, because it clears out just when the Army Intelligence Service had interrogated the witnesses. How convenient for debunkers. What boggles the mind is that an entirely new explanation is now put forth in this online webpage. According to this report summary, the Defense Council, they were somehow able to find evidence that the photos were fake. This is in contrary to what the Defense Council stated in this article. This evidence is described as the Defense Council, found a discrepancy in how the witnesses described the speed and size of the UFO. But this is in contrary to what the witnesses states in their paper interviews and what they later stated in the radio show, where they specifically addresses that they did not know how far away the UFO were and therefore did not even want to comment on its size. Yet another thing to keep in mind. The witnesses themselves states that they so much wanted to tell the truth and not go on TV. But it all happened so fast that they did not manage to stop in time. But this new text explains how the intelligence agency came to the TV studio just to clear out some things in a calm fashion. Why then, given that the witnesses wanted to tell the truth, did they not use this opportunity to do so in a calm manner? Several months after the Danish release of this film, I got an interview with the sister to one of the now deceased witnesses. On the contrary to what the alleged report summary says, according to the sister, not only were the young men interrogated, but also their parents were interrogated. The sister also brings up yet another mysterious information that contradicts the involvement described by the new report summary. She vividly recalls how terrified her brother were of the people following him. I asked who followed him. She said they assumed it was the intelligence service. When asked for how long after the incident the witnesses were followed by people they presumed to be of Army intelligence, she said she could not recall, but underlines the words "for a long time."
buskene rundt omkring derude på Amager og holdt øje med dem, og de kunne ikke gå nogen steder hen, det ved jeg. Min mor fortalte, at han blev bange, fordi pludselig så var der nogen, der ligesom fulgte efter ham, og, og så blev han jo også bange. Jamen, hvem fanden er nu det? At de skyggede ham, og det lyder bedre, ikke? Altså, han blev skygget. Og det ved man jo ikke af hvem, men sidenhen så var vi jo enige om, at det har jo været politiets efterretningstjeneste, ikke?
Altså, efterfølgende, altså efter de havde været fremme og anerkendende, så blev de skygget?
I lang tid efter.
Okay.
Actually, what followed that period is that the two witnesses moved in opposite direction. One moved to Sweden and the other moved to Aarhus, Jutland, pretty much the other side of Denmark. It is unknown whether these different aspects could be connected. Assuming the sister were not lying to me, assuming her brother did not lie to her back then, the Danish Army Intelligence Agency has long since changed their name, but it is presumed that they dealt with issues sensitive to national security, as it is the case today according to their website. It seems inconceivable why then would the agency use up so much manpower on witnesses to an alleged practical joke. And suddenly this report summary shows up, which to my knowledge cannot be verified. In order to check out the alleged interrogation report summary, I went through all of the Intelligence Archive weekly report files, together with a lot more of earlier classified material from that time frame. I were not able to find anything related to this case, and certainly no interrogation report were to be found anywhere. In the alleged interrogation report summary, the only archive reference that has been given on the webpage is certain parts of the Intelligence Archives shows. So I wrote Ole Henningsen, the author of the webpage article, to know where he had obtained this alleged interrogation report from. He wrote back that he may be releasing this archive file number later, if he got the permission to do so. I wrote back asking him what law, paragraph or special permission would be needed in order to give a reference to a former classified file that he himself allegedly already had been exposing. He wrote back that it had suddenly nothing to do with permission in regards to this file, but other material he might exhibit in the future, where this case file reference number is a part of. If a file reference should ever come out stating that it is a interrogation report from this 1959 alleged UFO hoax case, we need to authenticate this document. As evidence shows, if this document even exists, it could have been faked back then or in recent times. I have never myself been contacted by Ole Henningsen to bounce ideas off one another in order to both get smarter in this case matter and to eliminate any possible research errors. His organization has, since the release of the Danish version of this film, been involved in creating a Danish press release bashing my research. He even did a radio show without me, where he underlines the absurdity in my hypotheses and research. As mentioned, he also wrote a webpage article stating much the same. Every time I post something new concerning this case, people from this UFO organization, sometimes within minutes, spam the post with all kinds of attacks. Now, I'm not thin-skinned about this. I believe I understand the controversial nature of my research, but I genuinely get the impression that this UFO organization is not interested in my research. They seem, however, more interested in other people's interpretation of my research. There are a lot of research that still needs to be done concerning this possible Danish UFO cover-up case of 1959. I've had yet to go into any details why a massive missile system called the Nike battery were being built in the area. There could or could not be a connection between this possible UFO cover-up case and this huge military project. There could also be a possible valid research into how this case were treated the very first day. Within ufology, a lot of people talk about disclosure. One could argue that we actually had partial disclosure in Denmark in July of 1959. Lasted for one day, but still. One particularly closing argument in this regard: there are a lot of places where you hear that people are not ready for UFO truth. I will argue that people apparently were ready for UFO truth in Denmark already back in 1959. I base this on that I can't find one single article expressing anxiety or fear due to these 3 UFO photos. A third study is to find any more possible witnesses from that time. The chances of any witnesses still being alive is maybe slim. I'm looking into other articles from that time that could perhaps indicate other people talking about their experience that night. A fourth and even more easy study could be made in regards to evaluating the Danish media's handling of the UFO phenomenon. The main thing that to me speaks against a UFO cover-up case is the mere fact that how could the intelligence service know that new witnesses would not in fact come out with new photos of UFOs the very next day? How could they foresee this, as this would put the handling of this case in a very suspicious light? There seems to be a before and after this incident. A brief study at the Danish State Library seems to indicate that this case alone had a huge impact on the media's reluctance to report on UFO activity. There are several UFO cases from that area that has surfaced over the years, but they have ever since, it seems, only been treated as a mere entertainment in the most rear sections of the news outlet. This could explain how and why the power structure, high-octane speculation from my part, could have altered the reporting of UFO cases altogether. But a genuine power grab or a UFO policy change could in fact explain why the intelligence service dared to change the narrative as they could have had. Because they knew that information in regards to UFOs were being excluded from the mainstream medias. The sister of the now deceased witness believes the official UFO hoax story. When confronted with the massive involvement from the intelligence agency, the sister gave out her interpretation of the situation. To her understanding, the intelligence agency believed that it could have been real UFO photos. So they followed the young men, so if they would change their story again, the intelligence service would be the first to know. Again, that were her interpretation. According to the sister, the now deceased witness were often sought out by different people that all seemed to want to know whether or not they in fact were forced to change their story. As she recalled, people came asking him right up close to the day he died. Looking through Danish UFO history, I'm not aware of any other researcher than me that has publicly announced their skepticism regarding this 1959 alleged hoax case. That being the case, it seems strange that whoever kept prompting the witness for answers seems unlikely that they all could have been UFO researchers. This statement somehow makes me speculate that perhaps indeed dark forces could somehow still be tailing the witnesses from this possible UFO cover-up case. If that were indeed the case, it would explain why I have been unable to get a comment from the last witness that is also the photographer of the three whatever is on the photos. According to this article, already back in 1978, there were attempts to get this witness to talk about the alleged UFO hoax. The article states that the witness did not want to comment on the case at all. Of all the attempts made for trying to establish contact with this last surviving witness, only one phone call got through. A recording of this conversation can be heard just before end credits. In the apology explanation that came out the following day of the event, it was stated that the now deceased witness took all the blame for planning the alleged hoax. This witness did yet another interview about the whole incident the same day, but the other witness did not participate in this interview. It is also stated that the now still alive witness could not participate as he were no longer in Copenhagen. If the witness were in fact forced to change their story, my gut feeling told me that people react to that kind of authority differently. There has been a number of hints that suggest that perhaps this still living witness were the hardest to convince to change the story. And the compromise perhaps could have been that the other guy took all the blame. This gut feeling made me look into what else this witness has been doing since this happening. This last witness is also a writer. Back in 2016, he published a book called Rodløs, or in English, Rootless. In the preface of this book, this description is revealed about the story. I have had these recordings lying around for several years. Why I wrote them, I do not know. Maybe I had a tiny hope that one day my descendants would find interest in reading them. I no longer have that hope. But when I found them in the back of a drawer the other day, I reread them and found them interesting enough to dare to let the public see them. After all, these were events of national interests. Taking the massive discrepancies into account, one could ask themselves, is this guy somehow signaling out information that he, for some reason, could not talk directly about? I have yet to do a thorough reading of this book, and I have not found any slam dunk evidence, but there are several mysterious descriptions that may or may not hint different things. In this book, there are mysteriously enough a lot of talk about the main character being interrogated by the intelligence service, while he maintains his innocence in regards to acquiring secret information. There are several other mysterious coincidences that perhaps could be interpreted differently. About 50 pages within the book, another weird coincidence could be hinted as the main character suddenly describes a photo. In short, he is describing a situation portraying three beautiful women. He uses words that almost seem to make these women appear magical, and ends up describing the situation as without sound or motion. This is very well high-octane speculation from my part. Still a weird coincidence, everything taken into account. There is a lot more that really had made me suspicious about this alleged UFO hoax case. One of the last things is just the standard observation. I've talked to multiple people involved in the happening, read everything there is to read about the first day of the incident. I gotta say, I really have enormous difficulty in imagining how two young men were able to act their way through professional journalists, photo experts, the Danish Air Force, the Danish Defense Council, the intelligence agency, the Danish press, aeronautical organizations, UFO organizations, the international press, NATO's intelligence apparatus, apparently everybody, and allegedly not come clean until they chose to. Add to that 3 signed truth certificate, and completely avoiding any race charges is also something I can't seem to figure out. And if it were in fact the case, they really hoaxed everybody. Why the 60 plus years of silence? You could say that they suddenly felt bad about the whole thing, but why not brag about it at some point? Surely the event must also have made the young men feel superior to the rest of the country, having cheated everybody. Do this behavior make any sense if it were in fact all just a practical joke? I have listened to the radio interview they gave the same day many times. I gotta say, the way they just sit and explain things, it really sounds like they are describing a genuine experience. There are a lot of other interesting things in that same radio interview. The funny thing is that it is the radio interviewer that puts out the flying saucer reference. The witnesses says that is what it looked like, but do not add any other persuasive explanations. At some point the witnesses states that they had different experience of the sound. If they indeed lied, why would they not have come out with a more coherent explanation? Finally, one witness explains that a Danish UFO group had asked for the photos to investigate them. The witness seemed to underline that of course the photos should undergo more study. If it were indeed a hoax, it seems illogical to expose what you want to hide. I have talked to about 7 or 8 people directly or indirectly involved in this incident, and I do get a general sense that this case is a no-go. Some of the people do want to talk about it, but when I have brought up the cover-up hypotheses, they all seem to back out. That being said, I have never been contacted by any of the same individuals after the Danish release of this movie in order to sort things straight. I understand the controversial nature in shouting about an old UFO case where even the included witnesses states that it was a hoax. But as already stated, that I can't get the last witness to speak out to eliminate any possible errors in my research. If this witness finally come forward due to this film or other things, I will indulge people to be skeptical of anything and keep an eye on the evidence. And now, since 2017, the Pentagon finally admits that they themselves have studied the phenomenon of UFOs, therefore acknowledging the phenomenon. I can't prove whether what we see on the 3 photos is a UFO from outer space or inner space or wherever UFOs come from, or if it is a part of some dark military project, or if it is in fact real plastic plates. But explanation that chains both at witnesses and authority, signed truth statements, everybody believed the first story, evidence that points in other directions, massive involvement of the intelligence service, photos that do not seem to match the UFO, and so on and so on. At this point, as far as I can tell, you have to marshal your thoughts around a vast body of evidence in order not to get a little suspicious about what is indeed the truth in this 1959 alleged UFO hoax case. And you have to accept miracle upon miracle in order not to sway from the official narrative. Let me be frank, this case is not strong enough to prove a phenomenon. But if we indeed lived or live in a time where UFO is, however rare, real, as the latest Pentagon releases seems to indicate, time may reveal that a cover-up is indeed a more likely explanation in regards to the 1959 saucer over Copenhagen case.
Jeg sidder her og kigger på en sag her fra 1959, fordi jeg er lidt interesseret i UFO'er. Så kan jeg se, at du har været involveret i en sag, som kom frem på BT. Er det rigtigt?
Det har sin rigtighed, ja. Men det kan du læse om en masse andre steder. Jeg gider ikke rigtigt. Jeg har ikke tid til at snakke med dig. Kan du ikke give det godt? Nej, jeg ikke.
All you really need to know is infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion, 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 illusion.